In this extract from Marian Keyes' new novel, The Brightest Star in the Sky, we meet Grain Butcher, an ambitious married director of a TV production company, as she waits for the arrival of the man she hopes to turn into the next celeb gardener. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. 3 miles away, in a converted mews house, Grain Butcher paced in the double-height, light-flooded greeting area, waiting for the taxi. Mobile in hand, she hit redial for the 7th time and once again got Fion's voicemail. "Who turns off their mobile?" she asked, incredulous. She turned to stare at Alina, who was cowering behind the curved blonde wood reception desk. "Don't know," Alina mumbled. As the lowest of the low, she ultimately got all the flack. Well, there were several chronically angry people in the company, from Mervyn Fossell, the owner and producer of the company, and Grain, the director, who also happened to be Mervyn's wife. To the stylist, and a neat chain of blame operated in which Mervyn dumped on Grain, who dumped on the editor, who dumped on the senior researcher, who dumped on the junior researcher, who dumped on the runner, who dumped on Alina. The only person who wasn't part of the chain of rage was the stylist, and that's because she was freelance. "And he hasn't rung?" Grain Butcher asked again. I would have told you if he had." "Don't be glib, just yes or no answers." "No," Alina whispered. "No, he hasn't rung." Mervyn Fossell hurtled into the hallway. "Where the hell is he?" Coming," Grain muttered. "Go away, go on, keep making calls. I'll tell you when he's here." Mervyn, a short, fake-tanned tyrant, stared at Grain. His mouth curled into a sneer. "Go on," she said. With a silent but deadly glare, he returned to his office. As soon as his door shut, Grain started pacing again. "Here he is, thanks be to Christ." A taxi had drawn up outside. Grain strode out, thrust a tenner at the driver. "Keep the change," then hoiked Fion from the car. She clicked open the boot and stared at the emptiness. "Where's your stuff?" Fion indicated the one medium-sized bag on his shoulder. "What, that's all you have? For a whole month?" "What do I need?" Then Grain remembered why she'd fallen under his spell in the first place. Who would have thought that in this miserable shithole that was Pokey, she'd have stumbled across the likes of Fion? She didn't even know why she'd decided to go to Carmine Jr.'s christening. She hated her brother, she hated his wife, she hated the very air of Pokey. She'd been sitting at her sister-in-law's kitchen table, fighting for breath, counting down the minutes to her departure, when Fion had shown up to do Loretta's garden. Grain took one look at the hair, the jaw, the big spade-like hands, and got that tingly feeling, so rare and so cherished. "What planet has he come from?" she asked Loretta. "He's local. Since when?" "Years and years." "I don't remember meeting him when I lived here." If she had, perhaps she wouldn't have been so quick to leave. "Well, you might have. Moved here with his mother when he was about 12. She couldn't cope, poor woman. He ran a bit wild, teenage tearaway and all that, till he was taken in by the Churchills. Adopted. No, fostered." "Who?" The posh old pair in the big glass house in the valley?" "Yes. Giles passed on a few years back and the wife, Jemima, moved to Dublin." Out of nowhere, Grain was flooded with a memory of a beautiful, confused woman being unable to pay for her basket of food in the supermarket. Angeline, Fion's mother. God, yes! I remember the mother. And then she remembered Fion. His time in Pokey had overlapped with Grain's for perhaps only a year before Grain, aged 17, skipped for Dublin. Even then, at whatever age Fion was, 12 or 13 probably, he'd been possessed of a beauty, but he'd been far too young and too wild for Grain. Who could have guessed he'd turn out like this? Watched by Loretta, who was aghast at her brazenness, Grain marched right out into the garden shed and said to Fion, "Any chance of a quick gardening lesson?" He paused in the act of hoisting up a bag of soil. "And you are?" "Grain, Carmine's sister." "And you want a gardening lesson?" "That's right." He didn't seem terribly surprised. Probably used to women throwing themselves at him, she decided. "I haven't time for lessons, but you can come round with me," he said. "You can watch what I'm doing." Easy going, she thought. Good. She followed him out into the garden where a row of potted plants waited beside a patch of raw earth. He crouched down and tenderly removed one from his pot. His hands. You want to help me bed in these lilies? OK. On your knees, he added, slowing down his delivery. Deeply surprised, she narrowed her eyes, trying to gauge if he'd meant to sound suggestive. She had already written him off as physically devastating, but dumb as a post, on the basis that God gave only a certain amount of good fortune to any one person. But was she wrong? Not much you can do standing up there, he added, in a voice that was now entirely innocent. The things she did for her job, she thought, reluctantly falling to her knees in a patch of moist soil and letting him put the plant into her cupped hands. Scoop out a hole, he said, once again sounding like he was talking about sex. She wasn't imagining it. She was certain of it. Almost certain. Are there gloves? Well, she didn't want pieces of nature stuck under her nails. No gloves, he said. Get your hands right in. Don't be afraid of getting dirty. This time there was no mistaking the saucy overtones. She looked at him, and they maintained a long, steady gaze, reading the smirks in each other's eyes.